Hello, and welcome to the first episode of International Insights. I am Germán Rivera, and I'm here with
Sean Severson.
We are trying to create this podcast in order to bring light of some of the insights that we've gathered traveling across the world and living in various parts of the world, such as Sean in his life in China. And so, Sean, tell us what made you want to go to China?
Well, I must say it's quite a long story, but 6 years ago, I never thought I would be in China or have done what I have done. But I would say that it really came down to an opportunity and a few occurrences. I remember fondly back when I was undergraduate, my junior year, I found out about a travel study to China. And previously, I never thought about studying abroad or doing anything else, as my interest and my vision was somewhere else. But as I learned more about it, I thought it'd be a great opportunity because it wasn't too expensive. It was over a month long, and it was very comprehensive, and it was worth 4 credit hours. So after considering it, I decided, why not? So I went to China in the summer of 2013 from May to June, spent 5 weeks. We traveled to Hangzhou, Shanghai, and what's called Yellow Mountain, or in Chinese, Huangshan. And in that time, it really opened my eyes, and I learned a lot about life in China. I made a number of friends, and I really soaked up everything like a sponge. And coming back from that and going into my senior year, it really made me think, what else can I do internationally? What else can I do? And I started to think not just of things inside the U.S., but more globally. Yeah. So the following year, I did another study abroad program to Italy. And I stayed in Rome for 5 weeks for one summer semester, where I finished my last credit hours for my undergraduate and came back. And that was a very different experience from China, but it still was very interesting. And being in Rome, of all places, the history, the culture, and all of the different historical periods that are visible, all of the different architectural aesthetics, and just the people and the atmosphere there was incredible. I would say more so than my experience from China, but they're two very different places. But those experiences really pushed me to, when I was going to pursue a master's degree in further study, they pushed me to look both domestically and internationally for opportunities.
So you just finished your master's degree in international relationships in China.
Yes, I finished that last fall, and then following that, I did 1 year of Chinese language at the same university. So what I did was, after I graduated, I started applying for master's programs both in the United States and abroad. But then I got an offer from Zhejiang University, which is in Hangzhou. They had an international relations master's program, and I applied for it. And actually, it was quite interesting. I was actually in Italy on the island of Capri, and we stopped at a restaurant, and I checked my email, and I got an email from them saying I got accepted, and they gave me a full ride scholarship.
Oh, wow.
Which I was just flabbergasted because, tuition was waived. I got medical insurance for the entire stint of my study. I got a free dormitory, and I got a monthly stipend of 1,700 RMB.
Oh, wow. So it was pretty much your set for
pretty much. Degree. I mean, I was in shock because I had applied for the program, and there were some scholarships I applied for, and to get that offer, getting the best offer they had, was just, it set me, I was just amazed. And I realized, wow, this is pretty hard to turn down. And there's not really any universities that I found that would offer me something nearly as good, or as good of a educational package.
So prior to accepting, right? What did you have to kind of do? What was the the application in order to go and study abroad in China or around
Well,
the world?
basically, the application followed a typical graduate application in the United States. You have to write a personal statement of why you want to do things and how. You need to acquire all of your transcripts. You need to provide a background check. You need to provide um, passport information and other documentation to prove that you can do the program. And you need your undergraduate certificate or a copy of it at least. So basically, what I had to do was I had to put together all of these materials and then I mailed them out. And then the scholarships was basically a mirror image of this with a few extra or less items. And basically, I sent both these packages out back in the winter of 2013, and I got an answer back in early June of 2014. Uh, from what I remember, you can apply from the end of the year through the winter, and then you'll hear back in April or late spring, early summer. So it's a typical application process. You can apply in the winter, but the semesters there are more staggered. They start in September and end in January, instead of we're here where we typically start in
August. Yeah, August to December is a semester, and that's the fall semester, and then you got your mid January to May, June, or
depending on the university. Yeah. So it's like you take our semester, but you push it forward a month on each end. So, but so that's why the application period was basically the same timeline for most, but just a little different.
How was the opportunity introduced? Like, was there like anybody that kind of nutted you into choosing an international degree versus a local?
Yes, most definitely. The two professors who I went with to China through my university, they really gave me a lot of advice, and they really pushed me to explore opportunities internationally. And one of my professors, he's actually an alumni from the same university in China, so he knew about it, and he gave me some good advice on where to apply. And I think because of him and the other professor, they didn't push me to do it, but they gave me a lot of guidance that I could follow. That I think really aided me in getting this opportunity.
Kind of like the cheat sheets of how to study over there, huh?
In a way, yes.
Yeah.
But I found that, and also from discussing it with them and some other professors in academia, they said that if you want to do an international program, a master's program is the best because it's the shortest, and you can do a lot with it. It's not like a bachelor's or a PhD. It's 4 to 6 years, where a master's usually 1 to 2, maybe 3. So I think from what they've explained to me and the evidence they've provided me, doing a master's program internationally, like if you've done your bachelor's in the United States, a master's program abroad is, I think, a great thing to do, because you can do it 1 to maybe 3 years max, and you potentially will get a great experience where you can do your research, you can do whatever you're studying in a different environment, and that's going to open you to a lot more diverse job opportunities outside of your home country. And also, it'll give you connections, new friends, opportunities that you can potentially use after you graduate. And for example, now I'm back in the United States, I definitely want to maintain my friendships and any opportunities over there, because from being over there for 4 years, I've developed a very large group of friends and associates, but also I've discovered a lot of opportunities that I could potentially, continue to pursue later on.
It seems like it opened the world up to you quite literally, and having those external connections. The rule of employment anywhere is it's who you know. So it's
Exactly.
having those connections are always beneficial.
And going back to your question a minute ago, like, what did I have to do to prepare for this? Once I got accepted, once the shock died down, I'm like, oh my God, okay, I've studied abroad, but this is different, because the last 2 times I studied abroad, it was either through the school or it's a school-to-school program, so it's structured. Whereas this, it's structured, but you going there and getting set, it's all on you. You got no assistance. So it was a bit intimidating, and I was concerned about, oh my God, if I get over there and something doesn't work out, what am I going to do? But what I remember doing was, I remember that summer just working as much as I could for my summer jobs to earn enough money that I could bring over there just to have money in case something happened, but also getting all my domestic affairs taken care of, getting all my documents taken care of, updating things, just taking those 2 months after I got back from Italy, because literally I was in Italy finishing my undergrad from May to June, and I left for China in early September. So I only had about 2.5 months to get all of this stuff squared away. So I remember it was stressful, but also exciting, nervous, and scary all at the same time.
Yeah, no, traveling to a foreign country where you don't know the dialects, you don't know how things are, is kind of a scary opportunity, but also very exciting, right?
Yes.
As a student, like you said, this is on you. You are on your own going to this to China to study. What is kind of like the day-to-day life of you as a student in China in your master's degree?
Well, I'll be honest, it really depended on many factors. For example, I'll just start at the beginning. When I first arrived, there was about a 2-week period where you basically were assimilating in, where you arrive. Before I booked a hotel, because registration, I remember, was on the 12th and 13th of September in 2014. So I arrived on the 11th. So I booked a hotel. But what really helped me was, because I had been to Hangzhou a year earlier through my travel study, I still remembered a lot of places. So the hotel I booked was next to the hotel I stayed at back in 2013. So I actually did have an advantage. So when I got back, I'm like, oh yeah, I remember this street. Oh, this is Tianguishan. Oh, this is Baochu. Okay. Things have updated a little bit. Some new things here, or some things that were there then were not there. But it wasn't like, oh, this is totally new. So I had some familiarity. But I remember going to registration, it was very different from a registration at a college. Much less organized, a little more chaotic, but everything was still done. But given that was my first impression of the university, I was like, ooh, I was a little concerned. And then that same day, I got registered. They bussed us up to the campus we would stay. We got our dorm room, met our roommate, and that was pretty good. But unfortunately, I remember I got sick that first week there.
Oh,
so that was very, very annoying. Luckily, it was just a cold, but trying to get everything done, being ill for it was gone about a week. But I remember in that week, we had to get all our stuff set up. We had to get our classes registered. We met our program manager. We had to get our internet set up. We had to get our residence permit, because when you get a student visa, it's valid for 30 days. And then you have to go to the Entry and Exit Bureau to get your residence permit, which is good for a year. And you have to renew it every year while you're studying. So you have to do it in the first month. So it's not a pressing concern, but you have to do that in the first month. Otherwise, you're going to be in big trouble.
Oh, wow.
But it was quite chaotic. And what was really unfortunate was that I did bring a lot of cash with me, and thank God I did, because when I tried to use my bank card, I couldn't withdraw money. So I'm like, oh my God, what am I going to do? And I was really angry at my bank, because they told me that their debit and credit card system would work there, but it didn't. So I'm not sure if they lied to me, or they didn't know what they were talking about, or whether it's not something they knew. But I was very, very upset and angry, because I had $500 I brought with me. I spent about 200 of that on the 3 days of the hotel. And then I had to earmark around 400 RMB, which is about $60, for the residence permit to get that processed. And then I also had to open our bank account. And luckily, the school opened our bank accounts for us for our scholarship money. But here's the other thing. They didn't fund it for almost a month. For that first almost 3 weeks, it was very, I was thinking, maybe I made a mistake. Maybe I should go back. I was really questioning myself, but I'm glad I didn't, because after about 3 weeks, we got 2 months of our stipend in. So we got, instead of 17, we got 4,400 RMB.
That's
So I was like, oh my God, thank God. So, so as soon as I got that money, I decked out my dorm. My roommate had the same issue. I think all the international students that term had the issue. So we were all just, jumping for joy, thank God. And then got our classes set up, and we started courses not long after that. And after that period, I started loving it more and more. So that's what I'll say. That sometimes things may get off to kind of a rough start, but before you throw in the towel, you should see it through before you do anything. That's what I've learned. And don't judge, the system is not as functional. It's not that it's not as functional. It's just made different.
Yeah, I mean, it's a different way of doing things, especially it's a different country, of course.
Exactly.
So, like, the systems might not be equal to the ones. I know for sure, like, the American system for academia is monotonous and it's in getting acceptance and whatnot. What type of barriers you think you had, or like some of the things that, oh man, I really wish I would have known this before coming in here, like, and any like advice you would give probably to people that might be wanting to pursue a degree in China?
That's a very good question, and having been there and having faced difficulties and other problems, I have some really important points I would like to stress. First of all is I didn't know any Chinese at the time. So I highly recommend that before you go, you don't need to learn a lot, but you should learn some basic Chinese. It's going to make your life so much easier, especially given that most of the organizations and infrastructure is not going to be that English friendly, potentially speaking. Another thing is make sure your bank can have access to your funds where you are going. I thought I did that, but I didn't. I guess I wasn't thorough enough, and that almost put me in a very bad situation because I couldn't access my money. I had money, but I couldn't access it, and because they had a large number of students who could come in that semester, it took longer for our scholarship money to be allocated. So make sure you have enough financial resources. Otherwise, you could be in a very, very dangerous or difficult spot.
Yeah. Anything in particular you should just would have avoided in general going over there?
I can't say that there was nothing much to avoid because like crime and other problems, they're not a big issue over there. But I would just say make sure you have everything you need to be self-sufficient for a while. So I mean, I packed plenty of things, so I didn't have problems with clothing, cosmetics, or other things like that. But I highly recommend that you, as soon as you get there, make friends. And that's another thing is I didn't make a lot of friends very quickly, but I made one good friend from India, and we hit it off really well, and we helped each other a lot. So that's one thing is try to make some friends, especially with your roommate. Because I was lucky. My roommate was American, and there were very few Americans that semester. Oh. So it was perfect because we're like, hey, well, this is wow, because there was only one other American on our floor, and there was like 80 students on our floor. So we were very lucky. So we hit it off really well, and it was pretty smooth sailing because we heard a lot of horror stories where people from countries, from cultures are together in a room. There's a lot of tension because this is their standard of cleanliness. This is their standard of doing this. This is their standard of doing that. And it can be very different from the other person's. I was lucky and didn't have that problem, but I knew many other students who did.
Wow. So is Hangzhou and one of the international schools? The
cities, you mean?
International city or school?
It's becoming more international. When I arrived in 2014, it's only about 2.5 hours southwest of Shanghai, so it's definitely more international than most cities its size. But it's not going to be it's not as international as Shanghai or Beijing. But it's getting that way more and more.
Wasn't Hangzhou? Didn't Barack Obama visit Hangzhou
during the G20 in 2016? Yeah. He did visit, and that is a whole other story we can discuss another time.
Yeah, for sure. That must be discussed for sure.
But I would say that there's really not much that I regret. It was more just circumstances. Mm-hmm. I prepared pretty well, but mainly it was it's banking. It's if you have sensitivities to food or other things, do that. Pollution in China, sometimes it is bad. So I would recommend packing a mask or some other filters for you to wear. But overall, it wasn't. There's not much that I would recommend people do. Is just use common sense and just be comprehensive in in your planning and preparations.
Going through the day to day of a student, big part of being a student is the classes.
Of course, of course.
So you've been into have been most of your life in a U.S. classroom. How did the classroom in China differ from you?
That's
From here?
that's another good question. In its structure, just a classroom, no difference. But what was interesting is that while there were international students at my university, and I met some, in my program, we had students from America, Russia, Bulgaria, Italy, France, Turkey, Kazakhstan, where else? Mauritania, and Liberia. So very interesting group of students. And what I really enjoyed I really liked that a lot of the classes, they were lecture based, but they also had a lot of discussions, and a lot of more in-depth thought about political issues, economic issues, security issues, all within international relations. And I thought it was very interesting hearing all these people from different countries share their perspective on the same issue. And as an American, we hear the issues presented in the news, and we all have, of course, not a homogeneous viewpoint, but it's still going to be more similar. But I learned so much about how other people in these countries view these issues, and it really can be surprising, their perspective and point of view. Like, wow, I never even thought of that, or wow, I've never even understood that. Could be looking at the situation from this perspective. So I found that the classroom environments, it had its pros and cons. I think that U.S. system is a little more comprehensive in some ways, but what I thought the strength of this program was the international student body, and that we had professors from China, Japan, and the U.S. So the classes each had their own difference, whereas our American professor, he's very comprehensive, very good in instilling the discipline, the writing methods, and the research methods of how to do research using international relations, and having the Chinese professors and our one Japanese professor use their own styles. So you got exposed to different teaching styles, and that was really interesting overall. But so I would say the program maybe was not the best, but I think that the perspectives and all of the discussions, debates, conjecture on all these issues that we were discussing in different courses was very interesting.
Yeah, I'm curious about the interactions, like especially with students. The most international students that I've ever dealt with or had the pleasure of interacting with are from India, and you kind of get their point of view when I was in the engineering program. But having so many countries in one room, especially young, exploring the world type, I'm pretty sure it brought up some very interesting discussions.
Indeed.
How are the interactions with the teacher? I know that when I was in academia, the professors either were very open to us because I went to a school in which didn't focus so much on research, but more in the education aspect. But schools like U of I and the Ivies, they're more research based, right? Because that's how the teachers kind of got their funding. Mm-hmm. So and have less time for their students. So from going over there, how was the interactions between you and your teachers? Were they open to discussion or what happened?
I would say it's interesting. Our American professor, very open to students, very much stressing the research methods, how to do research, how to pick a topic and make an argument, whatever subject or whatever thing you're doing for your research project, or especially when you're doing a thesis. Their Japanese professor and Chinese professors, they were a little more like, say, more the Ivy League colleges, because the Chinese style is more lecture based. So what I did find was that our program was much more, not so much one-on-one, but more interactive, whereas the Chinese students in their own classes, in their own courses, without any international students, it's much more lecture, and that's it. There's not a lot of discussion. It's more they're taught, they learn, and it just continues that way. Whereas with us, our Chinese professor, since I believe he did study in the U.S., he had more of a mixed perspective. So he while we would have courses where it'd be all lecture with some questions. We'd also have courses where he would lecture for hour and a half, and then we'd have half an hour discussions on something. He taught our one professor, our Chinese professor, actually head of the program. He taught one course called Global Political Economy, and we had some wonderful discussions in that course where he would lecture very intently. We take notes, and then afterward we would discuss these things in depth. And I found that international students, we were much more willing to discuss things, to maybe even challenge our professors' ideas and opinions. But the Chinese students would never do that. And it has to do with, I think, more the educational culture there, where they're not going to question authority, or they're not going to question their professor's perspective because they think he knows more. Whereas the U.S. education style, it's more, not necessarily question authority, but question why. Why this? Why that? How come this? How come not that? But I thought that was a very interesting observation, because we had one lecture in which we had a big discussion where myself, the Russian students, the Turkish students, and a couple other different nationalities, we were just answering questions, asking questions, left and right. And eventually, after about 20 minutes, our professor, he was very impressed and happy with us, but he even made a comment. He's like, "That's wonderful. Now, do any of the Chinese students have anything to say?" And they didn't. So that was interesting. So I found that I think that with the Chinese students by themselves, it's much more just lecture, observe, listen, do your work. Now, it's not always the case, but that's more the style.
Yeah.
Whereas our programs, it's in an international program with international faculty, it's kind of got a mix of all of these. It's got more of the American style, and the Chinese style kind of put together with maybe other different perspectives. Because later on, I know they hired a Russian professor. So I think there's definitely a lot of diversity. And it depends, of course, on who's teaching the course.
Were your classes all in English, or was there a English side and a Chinese side? Like
our program, because our program is international, standard use was English. But in the course, we used a lot of Chinese, and actually I did learn a lot of spoken Chinese in the course, because while there was about 13 international students, we had about 6 Chinese students in our group. So, we did all our research and work in English, but in the classroom, we would go back and forth. Mainly English at first, because many of us didn't speak any Chinese. But in the first year, as we all learned more and more, because apart from our core courses, we did have to take a basic Chinese course and a Survey of China course. And in those courses, we learned, a lot of basic Chinese, like how to speak a little bit. I mean, nothing like my ability now, but, it's just you start using it more and more.
No, but it's really funny because I'm from Puerto Rico, and something that initially when I came to this country, I had ELS, or English as a second language. Kind of interesting that you got kind of put into the same thing. It's like you need Chinese as a second language.
Yes, and despite the fact that our program, if you just use English, you could get by. It was still, I think, a smart and practical thing to work on your Chinese.
Yeah.
For obvious reasons, because 1, you're in China. 2, you have Chinese students, and 3, if you can leave with some Chinese skill, that's going to be very potentially useful in the future for you, depending on what you want to do. And then going directly to the question about the classes, it's basically just like a normal college schedule in the United States. You have these classes on Monday, these classes on Tuesday, these classes on Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. Or like my first year, it was all courses, no research, just courses. And I would say, quite demanding. We had to write a lot of papers, wrote a lot of group projects, and in global political economy, our professor, he taught the first half of the book, and the next half of the book, he had each of us assigned to teach an entire chapter.
Oh, wow.
So we had to prepare. We had to read the chapter. We had to prepare the material. We had to, and basically he put us in the shoes of teaching it and making a PowerPoint and everything. So I thought that was a very interesting approach, because he would teach us, and then he would say, "Okay, I've taught the first 8 chapters, for example. Now the next 8, I'm going to divide between groups, and each day would be 1 chapter. So it would be 2 hours or maybe longer of you and your partner, or maybe a third person, teaching the class and the professor while he's critiquing." And I did mine on geopolitics in the Middle East. So we talked about ISIS and a lot of the other at the time, back in 2014, 2015, a lot of the events going on then. Yeah. So I really enjoyed teaching that, but I had to take a lot of time to prepare for that.
It seemed like the preparation for a class seems a little bit harder over there, or more stricter, because I know that I was here. Our professors, we technically did have textbooks and stuff, but we've never cracked them open. So it
Mm.
seems like
Well, that's an interesting thing because it is and it isn't. Like, I found that in some courses it was very strict. You need to read, you need to do that. With others, it was much more lenient,
mm,
but you still have work to do in other areas. So, like in global political economy, it was very more by the book, but at the same time, it was not always by the book. We have to do all this, all these extra stuff. And our one of our core courses was international relations theories, where we talked about the different theories in IR, like liberalism, constructivism, realism, neorealism, etc. And we would have readings every class about. We started off in ancient Greece with Thucydides about classical Greek politics and kind of realist perspective on the affairs of ancient Greece. Or we talk about Karl Marx. We talk about Immanuel Kant, John Locke, John Hobbes, all these different people who contributed to IR thought, and also moved even into like Kenneth Waltz and some more modern IR scholars. So that was a lot of reading. It wasn't so much projects, but we had a lot of reading, and and a lot of times we'd have a reading to do, and then maybe our professor would pick one person to give a presentation the next class about that reading and try to understand it from our perspective. So whereas relating it to my undergraduate, I think that some of the undergraduate courses were more challenging, but because this was master's level, there's definitely a lot more independent work and reading. But that's because IR is a lot about theory and how that theory can address and apply to real situations in politics and the geopolitics of the world.
Mm.
And you're also doing economics, security, and other aspects. So in many ways, it was a lot of work, but in other ways, it wasn't. So I would say that, our core courses were quite demanding, but some of the elective courses were much more laid back.
nice. I was looking up some of the education in China, and something that really popped up to me is like how hard the classes were, especially I guess for the Chinese
Most definitely.
sections, to the point that days before a test, like they basically shut themselves out of the world and studied for the 3 days in advance just for one test.
Most definitely. And I will say that I think that as international students, we did not nearly have the pressure that a lot of the Chinese students had. We had a lot of work to do. We had a lot of things we had to do, and time management was very important. But we definitely did not have to deal with a lot of the pressures that the Chinese students had. But at the same time, high school is actually a lot more challenging for Chinese than college is.
Oh, really?
So because once you're in college, you've passed the important line. Because if you go through high school, you pass what's called the Gaokao, which is their like SAT, ACT put together. It really will decide your future, whether you can or cannot go to college. So once they get to college, they're kind of like, oh, they still have to work hard, but they now know that if they just keep working hard and keep a good work ethic and do their courses, do well, they're going to graduate. High school, I would say, is much more challenging than college is in China, whereas in the U.S., it's kind of the opposite in some ways, depending on what you do. If you're doing AP or honors courses, maybe not, but it just depends. But that is one big observation I did notice, that a lot of the Chinese students, you never see them party. You never see them out drinking. They're always either studying in the library, in the dorms, especially in some of the more rigorous majors. So overall, very interesting observations to see a lot of these factors at play.
Did you ever get like these oh, he's a foreigner, so it's okay type of situations as a student in your classes? Like it's like, oh, he doesn't know any better.
For example, yes and no. Like in our courses, in our courses, coursework, and in those areas, not so much. Now, when you're speaking Chinese, make a mistake, most definitely.
Okay.
Or if you're in the international college, that's basically in charge of all the international students, regardless of your major, and you don't know this or don't know that. Oh, of course, because almost all the stuff we had to use for course selection and paperwork and documents was all in Chinese. And
Oh,
we're like, oh my god. So luckily, I had some Chinese friends, and they helped me out, and they saved my life. They saved my life to get through that paperwork and other things. And I thought that was like, wow, this is an international program. They don't have this, but later on, they actually did add English and other things. But when I did this program, the program was not very old, so it was still kind of a work in progress. Still good, but they were still working out the kinks in it. But that was quite challenging. So, or not knowing this because you can't understand it. So there was a lot of leniency there. You could tell it was frustrating for a lot of the administrative staff, but it was expected because they, these foreigners, they may have been studying Chinese in their home countries, but we're not going to expect them to read, legal documents or just all these academic documents and stuff. Now, we did have rule books or like academic outlines. Those had both Chinese and English. But at the time, the course selection and other online platforms were all in Chinese and no English. So it's like, oh my Lord.
So earlier you mentioned about a stipend that you would get as a student just to live in the country, right? Food, clothing, or what have you. So like the cost of living for you in China with this degree, like how much was it personal funding versus like an external source funding?
Hands down, it's cheaper than the United States. Unless you're going to parties, unless you're drinking, unless you're buying more luxury items, you're not going to spend nearly as much as you will in the United States. One, because the currency is lower, and two, food and a lot of other basic necessities are just cheap. So the 1,700 RMB that I got was more than enough to survive as long as I didn't do anything crazy. If I ate lunch at the student dining hall, if I ate lunch around campus, because to the east of campus, they had this street, they called it Dolojie, which basically means trash street, because it's full of fast food, all these shops, you can buy food, etc. But they're all geared for students, because our campus had about 20,000 students. It's huge campus. There's just this long street going out to one of the main roads further to the east, and it was just full of shops, stores, all catering to students primarily, and it was very cheap. Now, if you're going into the city to eat, a little more expensive, because I think on campus, one, they're subsidized already, and they're cheaper because students don't have as much money as working people.
Of course,
common sense. I would say if I stayed on campus and ate primarily on campus, that was more than enough to survive and even save some money. Even though that's only 1,700 RMB is not a lot of money in the United States.
So, what was your favorite trash food, I guess?
There was one restaurant at the end of Dolojie, Trash Street, and it was a noodle shop, and they had a really wide range of dishes. But I found this one dish, and in Chinese it's a jiro ganmian, which is basically chicken and noodles, because like jiro is chicken, and then like ganmian, mian is noodles, like tangmian is soup, ganmian is no soup, and it was 15 RMB, which 15 RMB is like just about $2.
Oh,
and it was a pretty big portion, and it had vegetables, it had hunks of chicken, peanuts, vegetables, corn, and assorted things all mixed together in a sauce.
Wait, are you telling me that you ate healthy in college?
Yeah, of course. No, trust me, I ate plenty of unhealthy things while I was there. But this place was very convenient. It was cheap, and it was healthy. So it was a staple place I went to. I didn't go there all the time, but I went there very consistently.
Man, my diet in college consisted of pizza, Taco Bell, and any other fast food that literally would kill me right to this day.
Well, I regret to inform you that most of those foods are not there. The pizzas there are very different. They're smaller and they're kind of weird. I mean, you can get it, but it's not like pizza here. Trust me. Trust me on that. So I ate a lot of foods that most college kids here never even experience or even find. I would say overall the food, I'm lucky. I'm not a picky eater, so it wasn't hard for me to adapt. But God bless a lot of my classmates and some of the other international students, especially from countries with more strict dietary disciplines. They had a very difficult time.
How, especially for, I'm guessing, people with vegetarians.
Yes,
or
because my good friend from India, he's a vegetarian, and he was a very strict vegetarian. But after a certain amount of time, he had a crack, and he had to add eggs to his diet because he was losing weight. And I'm like, man, you all right? And he's like, John, I'm sorry, but I don't want to break my principles, but I have to add eggs because I just can't survive because most of the foods are prepared with animal oils, or especially in the cafeteria. So that was, for him and a lot of other people who were vegetarian or had more strict diets, it was very difficult for them to adapt. In many cases, they had to break some of their own rules just to get enough nutrition. But I will say the food over there, it's very different than it is here overall. And here's a very important note. Chinese food in the United States is not like Chinese food there. It's very different. Now, if you go to, let's say, Chinatown in Chicago or New York, there you'll find pretty much the same thing. But if you're going to a typical Chinese restaurant, it's not going to be the same.
That disappoints, man. My general store is not the same.
Some things are similar, but you can definitely see they're not the same.
I guess I'll have to travel to Chicago or just go to China and get me some real good traditional.
St. Louis, in St. Louis, there's an area where there's a lot of Asian shops and restaurants, and it's actually pretty close to some of the cuisine you'll find in different parts of China.
We talked a little bit about dorm life, and you said, all right, you locked out. I don't know if they switched dorm roommates ever so often. So, like, can you give us an insight into dorm life? Or
yes, and this is going to be very interesting, just to let you know. So, first of all, they had just built 2 international dormitories because of their increasing number of international students, and each dorm had 2 students, and you had 2 beds, 2 nightstands, 2 desks, a personal bathroom, and storage areas in by the door. Not bad. Where they were brand new, but the building quality was definitely inferior to here. The walls were like plaster, and if you ran your finger on them, you would actually get some plaster come off. Not like flake off, but just the dust. I used to work construction during college in the United States, so I was like, oh my gosh, that's not good, or that's not good. But most people didn't know that. But since I've been in that industry to an extent, I have a little background knowledge where I was like, oh, this is not the best. But regardless, structurally sound, just cosmetically not the best.
Okay.
Now, but I'm not complaining one bit because the Chinese students on our campus, 4 students live in one dorm room.
How big are the dorm rooms?
Smaller than ours.
Dang.
Literally what they'll have is they'll have a desk and a bed on top of it. 2 students on one side, and they'll have a ladder, and they'll have a communal bathroom. And they just have a concrete floor. And when I visited some of my students or some of my student friends, I saw these dorms. Literally, they had a bed, no mattress, just wood planks, a sheet, and a pillow. Concrete floor, old style bathroom, and 4 students to a room. And I was shocked, but they said, oh no, this is great. In other parts of China, it's 6 to 8, maybe even more. And I was flabbergasted. But so despite any of the inconveniences, or maybe, for example, they didn't get internet set up in our dorms for over 4 months. Don't ask me why, but it took them forever to get internet. Luckily, we had Ethernet, so if you had a computer, you could use the Ethernet cable. But for quite a while, I would need to have to go down to a cafe next to a cafe on campus or another area to log on to the student Wi-Fi, to the campus Wi-Fi, or to a cafe's Wi-Fi if I wanted to save my data. And for a while, I didn't get a China SIM card, so I was just living off the Wi-Fi for a while.
Yeah. And
that's another thing is you can get an international phone plan, but I think it's much better to get one once you're there, because my phone plan through China Unicom, it was a special student deal. When I'm on campus, you have unlimited talk and text, and it had 4 gigabytes of data per month. It was only, let's see here, how much was it? It was about $5 a month.
Yeah, man, that's insane. I need my cell phone plan to match that.
The cell phone plans over there are so much cheaper than here. Now, given this is a student special, but even an additional benefit was in Hangzhou, any university campus, you had the same amount of data, talk, and text. So on campus, everything's unlimited. And when you're outside the province, it's more limited. If you're a student, it's perfect. If you're traveling around in China a lot, not the best, but you can't beat it for that price. And I was amazed, like, that's it? That's it? I do think that compared to the U.S., their plans are much, much more economical. I mean, there's no comparison.
There's no comparison in saying this. Finishing off your college degree, let's say, without the scholarships, I guess, or with, how much do you think it would have been compared to in the U.S., like getting your master's degree in the U.S. versus China?
Of course, there's pros and cons and advantages and disadvantages to both. But I'd say in summary, from my experience in China, I would say maybe some disadvantages would be I missed out on some of the advances and day-to-day events in the United States, and maybe some of the more, a lot of the, just the things going on in country, you kind of, outside of that, so you're not going to be in the loop as much. And also, you have to be careful on where you go to school overseas, because it may not be accepted or accredited in the United States. Now, in my situation, I didn't worry about that because Zhejiang University is number 3 or number 4 in China, and it kind of goes back and forth. It's their equivalent of one of our Ivy Leagues. Mm-hmm. So, and when I was there, they actually hosted some exchange students from MIT and Princeton. Oh. So I know that when it comes to quality, the university stands very high because it's in their top 5. It's a very good school. It's higher than the schools out in the U.S. on a global ranking, like much higher. And if you're going to go to like Peking University, Zhejiang University, Tsinghua University, I wouldn't worry too much. The main thing is university standing and accreditation. I wouldn't worry about. Just make sure your program is high quality.
Would you recommend people to pursue a master's in China or anywhere else internationally?
Most definitely. But then again, it goes back to what do you want to do?
Yeah.
If you are someone who is very homebound, you have a set career in mind, then maybe not. But if you're someone who's adventurous and wants to do something different and wants to get a different perspective and meet a wide range of people and maybe develop a lot of friendships that you could maybe use to go travel and meet them someday, most definitely. And I would say that beyond just the education, the experiences and connections, I think, are even more important. I learned a lot of knowledge and information, but what I've gained more is I've gained a lot more of learning about people, how they think, where people are from, why do they act and do the things they do, connections, lots of connections, opportunities, and a lot of potential future travel and maybe even future work opportunities abroad, not just in China, but other countries. Now, and I would say, and there's another thing I must point out, I was able to save a lot of money by being over there, by not having any tuition fees, by not having to worry about day-to-day expenses. It felt so nice. You're not stressed. You're not like, how am I pay this bill? How am I pay that bill? Now, of course, I had my college debt from my undergrad, and I had my truck and insurance and everything, but it's so much more manageable. And I was saving money every month the entire time I got there. And get this is a kicker. After almost the first year, from September, and then in May of 2015, they upped the scholarship amount from $1,700 to $3,000 for master's students.
Oh, wow.
And get this, they paid us back the difference from when we started.
Oh,
so
nice.
From September to April, they paid us the difference.
So you got quite a bit of back pay back there.
So we got $1,300 for all those months back paid to us.
Wow.
And I mean, who does that?
Yeah,
I mean, that's...
And they're college students, they don't need money.
So I remember, a lot of the international students on this, we were all partying up for, a couple of days.
Yeah.
We were like, because we're like over 10 grand richer in Chinese yuan, which is a lot of money because a typical salary in China is between 3,000 and 6,000. If you're in a bigger city, probably more, but that's a lot of money to get just, I'm like, yeah, baby, this is great. And what I think is most gratifying is that from being over there, 3 years of school I did, including the year of language, I also got a scholarship for the language too. I was able to save up money, and that money I have been able to put toward paying off my truck, which is now paid off, paying off over almost 90% of my college debt is now paid off because of the money I was able to save there. Maybe it has not allowed me to start a career in the United States until my current age, and we delayed that a little bit. But I think the economic benefits are also very important. Now, everyone's not going to have the same success with that as I have. You cannot deny that because of the cost of living, and if you get a scholarship or something, that can potentially, if you play your hand right, it can be very beneficial for you.
Well, Sean, thank you again for joining us for another episode of International Insights. We hope to see you guys again. That's all the time we have right now. Have a good night, and see you next time.
See you next time, and please stay tuned for our next videos. We're going to produce some more content, and we're thinking of more things to explain and discuss. So we look forward to producing more material, and we hope you enjoy it. And until next time, this is International Insights.